Welcome to the Chaos Sector. We return to the Matrix. Well, if I wanted a late-night snack but didn't want to drive to a restaurant, I would use services such as DoorDash, right? It's convenient, don't have to deal with the hassle of getting up, driving, some see it as being lazy, of course, but it has its perks. I come home after partying and now it's time to retire. But before I do this, I have a taste for some good old Jack and a crack. Place the order and simply wait. It arrives and now it's time to grub. The only problem is, my life was being threatened along with my boyfriend. Food was the last thing on my mind. I survived after being brutally attacked, but I eventually had to succumb to my fate. Friendships? Yeah, I never had real friends, only my sweet Ethan. Smiles, partying, spending time with those people didn't mean they were my friends. Friends don't let friends drive drunk, they say. Well, friends don't let friends fight to survive, and then claim I was unconscious on a 911 call. Real friends would try to help me, not stab me in the back with a fucking kitchen knife. When times get tough, so tough that your life is in danger, I discovered the best friend I ever had in my life was treated the same way. Somehow, a DoorDash delivery was delivered to someone who was being attacked? Well, I guess so, right? Now in the exhibit, it stated that Xana received the delivery approximately at 4 a.m. Quote, "These documents are maintained by a business. The state would seek admission of the documents. The state may rely on the attached records from DoorDash regarding a delivery to 1122 King Road on November 13th, 2022 at 3:59 a.m. This particular evidence provides a timeline of events for Xana before the homicides and corroborates state witnesses' testimony." Unquote. Now, whose testimony does this corroborate with? That would have to be none other than, drumroll, the DoorDash driver. Ah, yes. I noticed, though, that there isn't any record of when the order was placed in the exhibit nor in the receipt. Only the delivery time was provided, not the order time. Now, without the order time, either in the receipt or from any witness accounts, how can we verify the order was made by Xana? If it was delivered at 3:59 a.m., it should have a time of approximately 3:25, 3:30, within a 10 to 20 minute window of when the order was placed. And also, Moscow PD would include this important information about Xana, which would provide evidence of when she was actually alive and active. It also stated that Xana was on TikTok around 3:16 a.m., which would be approximately an hour of activity up until 4:12 a.m. Now, it does provide TikTok as proof of life, but this is not concrete proof, such as an order being placed with DoorDash, you see? In addition, you have to also factor in 12 a.m. Yep, that causes even more confusion. If Ethan and Xana were at home around 12 a.m., and reports claim they hadn't arrived back home shortly after 2 a.m., then how do we determine when they were physically back home here? We caught them again in another lie with proof. The report claims that Bethany, yes, Bethany, who was also at the party, stated that around 1:45 a.m., Ethan and Xana had returned back home. But how is this possible? When in the exhibit, okay, let's break this crap down once again. Quote, "Bethany also estimated that at approximately 1:45 a.m., Chapin and Kernodle returned to the King Road residence. The affidavit also stated that Funk and Mortensen both informed police that the other occupants of the 1122 King Road residence returned home on November 13th at around 2 a.m. local time and were asleep, or at least in their rooms, by approximately 4 a.m. Now let's go to the actual affidavit to confirm this claim. Quote, "On the evening of November 12th, 2022, Chapin and Kernodle are seen by Bethany at the Sigma Chi house on the University of Idaho campus at 735 Nez Perce Drive from approximately 9 p.m. on November 12th to 1:45 a.m. on November 13th. Bethany also estimated that approximately 1:45 a.m. Chapin and Kernodle returned to the King Road residence." Unquote. Now it says Ethan and Xana was seen by Bethany at the party from 9 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. Well, this would be 1:45 a.m., right? And that Bethany claimed they returned home around 1:45 a.m., right? Well, in the exhibit, it provides a totally different time of returning back home. Quote, "After spending the evening out, roommates Dylan, Bethany, Kaylee, and Madison returned to their home at 1122 King Road in the early morning hours of November 13th. At approximately 2 a.m., they met up in Kaylee's bedroom and talked for a while before going to bed. Xana Kernodle, who was out with her boyfriend Ethan Chapin, was not home yet." Unquote. Now, if Kaylee and Madison arrived back home around 1:56 a.m., according to her family, if Xana and Ethan hadn't arrived back home yet, then they would have had to return back in the 2 a.m. hour. It also states that Dylan texted an Uber driver at 2:10 a.m. and that everyone had decided to just go to bed, right? Yet, within this time frame, there is no mention of when Ethan and Xana had finally come back home. You would tend to think that around this time, they returned back home, and that Dylan, who stayed on the same floor, would have mentioned when she either heard or witnessed them coming back, yet no mention of their arrival. Mind you, this exhibit is displaying the accounts of one of the surviving housemates. So whoever this was has claimed that Ethan and Xana weren't home yet. But for some reason, that surviving housemate never provided any witness accounts of when they finally made it back home. Let's think about it for a moment. I think the problem here is that they are pairing Bethany and Dylan together upon arriving back home. If they arrived back at different times, then the 2 a.m. time frame would have to distinguish a specific person being a surviving housemate who knew firsthand that Ethan and Xana weren't back home yet, you see? But if they pair them all together, it's like they all arrived back at the same time, went upstairs to Kaylee's bedroom to talk for a while, discuss getting food, and within this time frame, just throw in an anonymous claim that Ethan and Xana weren't home yet. It would be different if it stated that Dylan noticed Ethan and Xana weren't in her bedroom, so she assumed they were not home yet. Or Bethany noticed this. There isn't a specific person in the exhibit that actually confirms the claim. And this indicates the claim is not true. Don't overlook this, because someone had to account for this claim, either it be Bethany or Dylan, yet neither were revealed as observing it. It doesn't clarify which surviving housemate observed it, nor does it clarify which surviving housemate observed them coming back home after 2 a.m. It's a simple witness account, right? Just clarify which surviving housemate witnessed it, damn it. How can it be reported that Bethany estimated that Ethan and Xana returned home around 1:45 a.m., yet the exhibit is stating they weren't home yet? In that setting, Bethany is already home, and we assume she would have arrived ironically at 1:45 a.m. So how can Bethany estimate that they were home at this time when the same person based on the exhibit is at home at this time and it's reported Ethan and Xana weren't home yet? This is the problem, a bunch of misdirection. In fact, Bethany's return home was also confusing because in early reports, it claimed she arrived back home around the same time Dylan did, which was around 1 a.m. Yes, 1 a.m., not, I repeat, not 1:45 a.m. We don't know when anyone arrived back home, to be honest. This has always been a mystery, based on the conflicting information about a 12 a.m. return back home, eating pizza and returning back at 1:45 a.m., and then not being home until after 2 a.m. These are 3 different times of Ethan and Xana at home, which means something is being hidden. Now pay close attention because this will lead up to Molly, trust me. Now let's tie this in with Molly's delivery.
Without that order time, there's no actual proof she ordered anything, even though there is a receipt that showed it was delivered. And this goes back to the claim that the food was ordered and delivered by Bonnie. Someone visited the Jack in a Crack where the order was placed. In that audio, a woman is speaking to an employee about the DoorDash delivery. Now, this audio didn't get much recognition from the mainstream media, but social media did address it for some time. And it was assumed to be Bonnie, who had not only delivered the food, but also ordered it. The young male employees described a girl with dark hair who had ordered and delivered the food. Again, they described the dasher as a, quote, girl, indicating a younger female. This would be Bonnie. Now they went on to explain that the driver had come back to the restaurant, explaining how she was traumatized, wasn't dashing at that time and such. But they also mentioned that the FBI had visited the restaurant several times as well. There is a reason the mainstream media didn't give this any attention, because it creates suspicion, and it also contradicts the claim Xana ordered anything. We went over this, but now that we have the so-called DoorDash driver identified, we'll gladly put the pieces together. One would say, well, the individual claimed to be the DoorDash driver, right? And this would basically make the previous event, this would mean the employees lied about who the DoorDasher was. Keep in mind, this was very early in the case, and I believe it was in January of 2023, which was less than a month of when Kohberger was arrested. Conflicting interest here. The woman that visited the Jack in a Crack spoke to those employees about the DoorDash delivery, right? Correct. Now, this was physically at the restaurant, as we heard all of the beeping, orders being placed and such. It was at the Jack in a Crack. But the description of the dasher in that audio does not match the description of the recent female depicted as the driver. That's right, Molly McMichaels is the reported dasher, and let's just get right into it. Of course, everyone has already questioned this individual, but we came across a recent video from Bubbly Waters who pointed out a few oddities. Others have debated what was stated by Molly, and we do hear her state she will be testifying in the trial, and also that she saw Brian. Now we'll get into all of that, but let's address something Bubbly Waters pointed out. She made a great point about how law enforcement basically bullies drug offenders who may be informants or potential informants, in which they flat out harass them by pulling them over, implementing the threat of authority to get them to comply. From the beginning, Molly asked, quote, "What are we doing?" unquote. Bubbly Waters suggested that Molly already knew what the stop was about and was simply ready for, quote, instructions. It's possible, but let's examine more. Later on, there was an officer searching the vehicle, and he claimed that there was meth inside the vehicle. Molly became distraught, claiming it was not hers, and of course it wasn't her vehicle. But based on her body language and peripheral paranoia about what that officer was doing near the vehicle, we can suggest that Molly knew there was meth in the vehicle. Because instead of focusing on the female officer in front of her, which is displaying the body cam footage, she is frequently looking back at the other officer. Yet it's also possible that due to her run-ins with that specific officer, named Jordan, perhaps he planted the meth in the vehicle, which is something he has done, or other officers have done to her in the past. What Bubbly Waters essentially claims is that Molly was being harassed by these officers because of certain offenses she may have had in the past. And even if she was in fact an informant, these officers planned this stop to basically show her that at any time they can simply plant drugs in her vehicle and she would be arrested. Since she has a criminal record of drug possession, it would be very difficult for her to challenge anything. So the only thing left for Molly to do is do the time and agree to whatever terms law enforcement puts on the table. We all know that drug users and even drug dealers are the primary sources of informants for law enforcement, and we can suggest that this body cam footage is displaying their relationship in real time. It's actually sad to be treated this way, because this is also an example of framing someone to get them to cooperate. Drug addict or not, Molly is still a human being, you know. There was also an issue with the time that Bubbly Waters pointed out. Not only the time, but the date of this arrest. On one body cam, being in the field, it has a time of May 9th, 2024. Yet when she is brought into the station, the time is April 9th, 2024. And it's not the day that is different here, this is the month. The format of time displayed is the year, the day, and the month, simply reversing the time format. Of course, in the original or common format, it would be the month first, then the day and year. In other formats, you have the year first, then the day, and the month, which is what the body cam is displaying. Yet, of course, there are different dates displayed. When Molly arrives in the station, there is an officer standing in the distance, as seen here. The video switches from the female officer's body cam to the officer in the blue uniform. It is his body cam that is displaying a different time. We know this is his body cam specifically because of the location of where it's recording from, behind the desk. He is standing right there. And remember, it's not just the time, it is the month. What seems off here is that Molly's arrest was literally 2 months combined as one physical traffic stop and arrest. She's pulled over and arrested on May 9th, 2024, and then is brought into the station April 9th, 2024 of the same stop and arrest. Surely there's an explanation for it. We will look into the discrepancy. But let's dig into the issue everyone is concerned about, the testimony.
As far as that time discrepancy, it may be based on having multiple dates of charging Molly for crimes. Since she would be considered a repeat offender or always finding herself in some form of trouble, Pullman PD just adds another date to her arrest record from one arrest. Since she can't really fight this criminal activity, well, perhaps this is how many drug users end up with tons of charges on their record? That seems logical. But we examined the audio, and Molly does mention she will be testifying in the trial, also mentions she saw Brian. Now, before we dig into the problem, which is a major problem, let's first clarify a few things. Molly is talking about having PTSD, witnessing her husband get shot in front of her. This does seem to pan out. There is a report about it. Quote, "Magistrate judge has ruled there's enough evidence to merit a trial for a Moscow man charged with murder in connection with the shooting death of an acquaintance." Nathaniel H. Nisbet, 28, is charged with second-degree murder after prosecutors said he shot and killed 42-year-old Charles Pat McMichael during a confrontation at a Moscow home on November 10th. Magistrate John C. Judge made the ruling Thursday at a preliminary hearing, sending the case to 2nd District Court for trial, the Lewiston Tribune reported. Police said the shooting took place at the Bel Air Mobile Park. McMichael's wife, Molly McMichael, testified Thursday that she and her husband were to help Erica Rosamando, Nisbet's wife, change the locks and fix door jams on her mobile home. Rosamando, she and her husband were separated and that Nisbet wasn't supposed to be at the home. Unquote. Now, this was in 2013. Everyone digging into Molly's past has perhaps already revealed this, but we want to confirm her claim of her husband being shot and murdered. Interesting enough, though, you have Judge who handled the case and none other than Latah County Prosecutor Bill the Real Deal Thompson as the prosecuting attorney. Maybe Bubbly Waters hit the nail on the head about Bill Thompson and Molly. But back to Molly's arrest. She then segues into mentioning how now she has to testify once again due to the murder case with the college girls. It's clear that is what was stated. Now the next statement was, quote, "I'm the DoorDash driver and I saw Brian," and the fading words are unintelligible. But we clearly hear all of this. Yet there are a few problems that Bubbly pointed out with Molly that we want to build from. We searched for Molly McMichael's arrest records, and we couldn't find anything. But we definitely found arrest records for Loria. Didn't dig too deep. It's not our style. Let's just go over the recent arrests of Loria, who we'll nickname Molly the Magician. As you see here, Molly the Magician was arrested on January 28th of 2024 at 2 a.m. She was charged with possession of controlled substances, possession of paraphernalia, and violating parole. Wow, she's out of control, hey? Then there was another arrest May 22nd of 2025 at 4:35 p.m., and the charge was a fingerprint code violation. We had to research what this crime actually was, and basically it appears Molly the Magician failed to appear for a fingerprint charge, meaning she did not show up for a scheduled court appearance or hearing related to a criminal charge that requires fingerprinting. That's interesting. She doesn't want to give her fingerprints for some mysterious reason. Then a month later, she was arrested on June 5th of 2025 at 12:34. We assume this is PM. Could be M though. Yet there isn't a criminal charge here. If she was booked, then where is the description of her criminal charges? Booking is the process of obtaining all the information of the suspect after, I repeat, they have been arrested and charged with a crime. So, where is the crime? Now, Bubbly Waters suggested that the individual in the body cam was not Molly McMichael. It was actually Loria Zedek. Well, we go one step further. Loria Zedek is pretending to be another person named Molly McMichael, who is being depicted as the DoorDash driver. Now, they're both from Moscow. This is Molly McMichael. As we see, she lives in Moscow and is from Moscow. The odd thing here is that it states she is married to Charles McMichael since 2005, but he was murdered in 2013. Some may consider this just in memory of her husband. That's fine, we can accept that. Although they could pass as the same person, public records have Molly's age being 44 years old and Loria's age being 50 years old. Here's Loria's profile. She lives in Moscow, is from Salt Lake, and had been married since 2022. These are two different people, but Loria, for some reason, is impersonating another person, claiming to be the DoorDash driver who will be testifying in the upcoming trial. It begs the question, for one, why the hell would she do this? Well, in her LinkedIn account, she describes herself as a, quote, freelance research assistant. Well, it seems she's applying those skills quite well, because she definitely has done some research on Molly McMichael. I mean, she knows that her husband was murdered in 2013. She knows Molly had to testify in that murder trial. She knows about the murders in this investigation. She knows there was a DoorDash driver. She knows Brian Koberger is the accused murderer. She's done her share of research. The other question is, how can someone impersonate another woman and somehow not be found out by law enforcement? Maybe this is why there isn't any criminal charges of Molly McMichael anywhere. I see the fuckery starting to reveal itself. In this body cam footage, you have a woman who was pulled over. The female officer asked her name, and she states Molly McMichael. But the other officer, named Jordan, is obviously familiar with Molly the Magician. He apparently pulled her over in a previous stop, which was a DUI arrest. But if there was an arrest, was there any identification? I'm guessing there wasn't. Now we searched the Axon channel, who provided this body cam footage. The title of this body cam footage is Prescription Medicines Leads to Woman's Second DUI Arrest in Pullman, Washington. So this is her second arrest in Pullman. Yet we searched all throughout that channel and didn't see the first DUI arrest. But there were videos of, get this, repeat offenders. Go figure. Okay, so in the body cam footage, the female officer is asking her questions and such, and states, quote, "Molly, I know you were arrested for a DUI before." Now, how could she know this, first of all? This would require some information in Pullman PD's database, which would be an arrest and charge for DUI. Since this would be prior, then Molly the magician gave them Molly McMichael's name. How did that work itself out? Second, Molly the magician is telling the female officer that the previous so-called arrest wasn't an arrest. She claimed that the officers took her to the hospital to get her blood drawn, and then they let her go. She goes on to say that she asked if she was under arrest, and the officer said she wasn't being arrested. The female officer didn't seem to have a response to that, indicating that, that's right, she was never arrested. And here, she wasn't arrested. But this is a script. The female officer is just carrying out the plot, trying to make it authentic to the public. She already knows Molly the magician wasn't arrested prior, because the woman she is pretending to be, Molly McMichael, was never arrested before. So we have two incidents, where Molly the magician has been driving under the influence, yet was never arrested and charged with DUI. And the reason she was never charged as Molly McMichael is because this would be in public records. And based on Molly the magician's condition, clearly showing a drug addiction in the footage, it's safe to say that she would have a criminal record like, well, look at that, Loria Zedek. Yep, and that would cause major problems, because what would happen when Molly McMichael, I don't know, just so happened to search herself online and see that she had been arrested twice for DUI, possession of controlled substances, possession of paraphernalia, parole violation, fingerprint code violation, you name it. She would lose her ever-loving mind. This is why she failed to provide her fingerprints. Yep, that fingerprint would eventually become a problem for Molly the magician, impersonating Molly McMichael. Slick but not slick enough, she needs more WD-40. In her so-called arrest and encounters with law enforcement, she doesn't provide fingerprints in one charge. All these charges are one big farce, though. Law enforcement won't obtain her fingerprints. Not while she's posing as another person. Oh, no way. Arrests are more transparent now, so body cam footage would expose everything. Just like this body cam. And as Molly McMichael has never been arrested and charged with anything, simply released. This is corruption. You see, Loria can get away with this, in the pockets of society, and of course, with the very entities that are conspiring with her. I wouldn't be surprised if she has attempted to use Molly's identity to scam her out of money as well. Hello? Can someone contact the real Molly McMichael? Because you might want to concern yourself with what's being done in your name. Crimes are being committed in your name, and even being associated with a murder case. But Pullman PD has to let her go. Because of the aforementioned complications, an actual arrest would cause for the real Molly McMichael. And the biggest reason is they used Molly the magician to convince the public that this woman was the DoorDash driver who will be testifying. This is why this body cam footage was nested so discreetly on that channel, because if the true crime community had gotten a hold of it before, there wouldn't be the news cycle of a DoorDash driver testifying in the trial, because the so-called driver is impersonating another woman. In that body cam, when Molly the magician starts to segue into talking about testifying in the murder trial for Koberger, the officer states Anne. Molly's next word was in fact Anne. At this point, she had already explained her issues regarding her husband's death, PTSD, anxiety, testimony in that murder trial, etc. But for the officer to say, Anne, this means there is something else that needs to be discovered by the officer. Yet, there wasn't anything else. Molly explained her situation. Before the officer actually finished asking, Molly was already connecting the previous issue regarding her testimony in her husband's murder to her upcoming testimony for this trial. Meaning the officer is preparing to ask a question with the word Anne, which Molly responds, and now I have to testify in a big murder case in Moscow. The officer didn't have any inquiries in our view. It was a reference point, or cue to go ahead and drop the so-called bomb of being a witness that night. It may not seem like that big of a deal, perhaps a coincidence. Yeah, it's possible. But it could also be possible that Pullman PD, yes, Pullman PD, had already grabbed a so-called witness to testify against Koberger in trial. And since Bill the Real Deal Thompson was the prosecutor in the murder trial of Molly's husband, this could have been the very inner workings of the frame that we never knew existed, you see. Mind you, the name Molly McMichael is a recent discovery in the case. This name never existed in 2024. It would have been exposed already. Nobody knew who the hell the DoorDash driver was. We suspected it was Bonnie, and still do. Heck, it was even suggested that Koberger was the DoorDash driver. Throughout that time frame, Molly McMichael's name was never mentioned, speculated, she didn't even exist in the investigation. Yet, this body cam footage existed that long ago. So, why wasn't this name ever mentioned? Which would have led to, oh that's right, it led to this very problem. Molly McMichael being exposed as Molly the Magician. So think about the body cam footage here. She is being depicted as Molly McMichael, yet is actually Loria Zedek by legal name, in real time of that footage. And digging even deeper, Pullman PD would definitely know this as well. So this proves that the so-called arrest was simply footage drummed up for that very claim of being the DoorDash driver and to testify. The arrest was actually not an arrest, because Molly McMichael wasn't charged with a crime. Now Loria Zedek, though, does have a slew of criminal charges, and she's out here breaking the law left and right.
Molly the Magician will be the distressed, suffering, and struggling DoorDash driver who simply was doing a job. Ah yes, the sob story of losing her husband back in 2013, struggling with anxiety, even becoming emotional on the stand. All of this will be used to create a sense of sincerity while claiming she witnessed Koberger at the home that night. Yep, never mind that her delivery was at 3:59 a.m., while the alleged Koberger wasn't actually stationary near the home during this time frame. The defense would have a field day with this claim. It would have been more logical for her to say she was the DoorDash driver the night of the murders, arrived around 4 a.m., believed she saw a white vehicle driving around near the neighborhood, but couldn't tell what type of vehicle it was though. It provides credibility based on an observation for the witness account. Yet if she is claiming she actually saw Koberger and she was parked near his vehicle, you've overstepped your boundaries of deception, ma'am. Of course, what would Molly the Magician be doing, and where would she be located to have been physically able to see Koberger and to be parked near his vehicle? The drunk buffoon blabbered out a so-called witness account of Molly the Magician claiming to have spotted Koberger, quote, staring inside the home. Really, so you do realize that this would mean Molly the Magician is hanging around until approximately 4:10 a.m. or so when the alleged Koberger is preparing to enter, right? Based on the surveillance footage, they are claiming that Koberger didn't actually park until around 4:07 a.m. If you stuck around that long as a DoorDash driver, then something was suspicious to you. So, why didn't you call the cops then? Yeah, it's impossible for her to see him, but hey, as long as she's emotional and claims to see him, the prosecution thinks this will win over the jury. And guess who's behind all of this insanity? That's right, the prosecution and law enforcement. The chaos is always finding things indirectly. Quote, "Hi Molly, Daniel from the Drunk Turkey Show on YouTube is attempting to get a hold of you in order to give you some helpful and important information about something. Just wanted to let you know. Prayers for everything you're going through." Unquote. Now, the chaos is wired different. Most people in reading this would focus on the Drunk Turkey Show, right? But we focused on the name of this poster. Michelle Madison Morgan. Doesn't seem there's anything suspicious here, right? Well, let's see here, take a trip back to something for a moment. Quote, after spending the evening out, roommates Dylan, Bethany, Kaylee Gonzalez, and Madison Morgan returned to their home at 1122 King Road. Madison Morgan? Might be a coincidence, but it just feels off, you know? Is it me? Or does it seem as if there is a lot of potential impersonating going on here? I mean, we already see that Loria Zedek is impersonating a woman named Molly McMichael. You have Eric Gower deemed the private driver, yet Batman claimed he was the private driver in his law and crime interview. If people still think that Eric Gower was the private driver, then who the hell got interviewed by law and crime? And digging deeper, why would they feel the need to claim they were the private driver? Batman's interview cancels out Eric Gower because what would be the reason for doing such a thing? And what if Michelle Madison Morgan is snooping around in some nefarious capacity? If you think about it, her name is the same name in the exhibit. I just don't see that as a spelling error. She's communicating with someone who is impersonating another woman and is attempting to lead her to the drunken buffoon, who clearly has been compromised in this case. She left that post recently, which means she has probably already seen the barrage of debunking Molly the Magician in the body cam footage. Seems like damage control to the chaos. Now, let's address the real Molly McMichael being the DoorDash driver. Now in the public group for DoorDash on Facebook, Molly McMichael joined the group about 6 months ago. The odd thing here is if she was a DoorDash driver, then why did she join the group this late? 6 months ago would be approximately in January of this year. Wouldn't she have joined the group prior to the murders, which would be either months prior to November of 2022 or even earlier? Here's the main problem. That can be subjective, I guess. But in the narrative that she was the DoorDash driver, then why would Loria Zedek feel the need to impersonate her as the DoorDash driver? It's the same problem with the private driver. If Eric Gower is the private driver, then why would Batman claim to be the private driver? It's possible Molly McMichael was a DoorDash driver, but if someone is literally impersonating her as the driver, then by logic, we come to the conclusion Molly didn't service Santa that night, even if she was a DoorDash driver at that time. I mean, what else makes sense here? We can't go with the assumption that Molly McMichael is afraid to publicly speak or doesn't want to testify because, wait, we have to keep in mind that law enforcement is in the middle of any and everything regarding witnesses. This also includes the FBI. So the entire circus act of Molly, the magician, being so-called arrested is a scenario where the real Molly would have already spoken to authorities, provided her witness accounts. That doesn't feed the narrative. Her witness accounts wouldn't include seeing Kohberger's vehicle anywhere near the neighborhood, which doesn't help the state's argument. So they just got some wacko to pretend to be Molly McMichael and flat out lie about what she witnessed. Keep in mind, Molly the magician is not a typical drug addict. Yep, she's a, quote, freelance research assistant. Just a fancy way of saying she's an informant for law enforcement. In fact, it's also possible that she's not a real drug addict. Yes, an FBI agent going undercover. It happens. Many so-called drug addicts are deemed informants working with law enforcement, but some of them are literally law enforcement themselves. They never had a witness account from the DoorDash driver early on because this person was never interviewed. Moscow PD literally revealed the identity of Eric Gower, deemed the private driver. Yet the identity of the DoorDash driver was never identified. And this is because that person was always an informant from the beginning. Only problem is the informant is someone who had charges dropped in the overdose death of Caden Young. Yep, that would be Bonnie. The description of the DoorDash driver from the employees at Jack in a Crack was in fact Bonnie. Law enforcement realized that this theory was gaining too much headway in the true crime community, and they needed a redirection. And Molly the magician, who is from Moscow, and was in Moscow on November 14th, a day after, utilized her research assistant skills and offered her services. Heck, even Megyn Kelly indirectly linked Bonnie and Clyde to the murders. For Kelly to evaluate those two in connection to the murders tells you that the theory was changing the perception of the case. Just so happened to come across one of our posts regarding this issue. Quote, Megyn Kelly is just performing damage control. Nothing new here. What makes her decide to dig into Bonnie and Clyde, but the main news stations covering the case wouldn't even touch them? If you say they're dishonest, realize that Megyn is also a part of that dishonest media. They always have some, quote, honest element in media when the truth starts to hit home. Think about it. Why did the authorities release body cam footage of Bonnie's DUI charge? Because they knew everyone in Moscow and Pullman knew she was responsible for or associated with the murders. So, of course, they also performed damage control with that body cam footage. Unquote. This was about a year ago. Now, honestly, Kelly is somewhat tolerable. She's more of an attorney by profession, yet at least has an honest bone in her body. But the point out of all media, we don't recall any other media source focusing on Bonnie and Clyde throughout this case. Not the major cable news networks, not News Nation. Old hag Nancy Grace definitely wouldn't do it. Law and Crime never mentioned them. It was never acknowledged as a possibility. And although we see it as damage control by Kelly, she at least provided an optimistic conversation to the why in the case, because the why has never been established. And to give her a little more credit, she also pointed out the inconsistencies with Dylan's accounts, something the mainstream media is clearly not willing to do. Here's a screenshot of Ethan's sister-in-law. We pointed this out as well. Not to be fair, there is no way to know if this is actually Ethan's sister-in-law, but the point proven in this post remains. Quote, yes, I hope it will come out what Dee heard. Dee supposedly called all the girls in the house after the crying and screaming stopped and no one answered, and she still didn't call the police. She needs to explain herself and her actions that night. Unquote. To be considered a genuine media source, you have to be able to bring about a difference of opinion, different perspectives, and the ability to accept truth. The theory of the murders being drug-related is something many do not want to accept. Yet if you noticed, no offense, but there are a lot of drug addicts who are popping up out of nowhere associated with this case. Caden Young, a student at the university, died from an overdose. Who sold those drugs to him? That's right, Bonnie and Clyde. That's a fact. It's not speculation. These two individuals were also deemed the pushers in the town of Moscow, and it's confirmed with the death of Caden Young. This young man was a frat member of Alpha Kappa Lambda, right down the street from the neighborhood of the massacre in the victim's home. There have been arrests of drug dealers, drug users directly and indirectly associated with this case. And there is a drug user who is depicted as the DoorDash driver. This has drugs written all over it. And this is why drug users are being used like there's no tomorrow. It's easy to bribe them, lighten sentences, pay them off, etc. Yet just say you were the DoorDash driver, and nobody can really refute it, right? Think again. You've been exposed for impersonating another woman named Molly McMichael. Your testimony will be thrown out faster than you can blink your eyes. And then that will only lead to inquiring into how did she even get in that position to do such a thing. That's right, law enforcement, and the state has to be held accountable here. This is a conspiracy by law. In conclusion, Molly the magician had a story to tell, but tripped and fell down a deep well, and now she's in hell. Oh well, this is the chaos sector.